Welcome to the table for the Friday, February 13, 2026 installment of Market Plus. Karen Braun's back with us. Karen, you were a guest for us on our live show in LeClaire. You were here on a panel before. This is your first time solo. You are coming off of a big week, big 2 weeks. You were not necessarily too many time zones away, but on the other side of the world in Brazil.
Yes.
I had to cut you off about cattle, so you get used to that. That happens. Tell me the importance of, or beef is having in Brazil right now.
So,
did that set you up enough?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And again, I have to bring back China because it's all about China. So Brazil has, in 2025, they had a record, beef production year, and a lot of that was driven by Chinese demand. Exports to China up hugely from the year before. So it's kind of a really different story in Brazil right now versus the U.S. I mean, the U.S., the cattle supply is really, really constricted. Beef supply just really, really, really strained. Whereas in Brazil, total opposite. They have record production. They're able to thrive. And of course, the exporting situation. I visited the port of Santos while in Brazil. And, we listened to, the stats and all the improvements that they've made. They've increased capacity by 94% in 15 years. I mean, that's almost doubling capacity in 15 years. And so when you think about it's hard to wrap your head around that. But yeah, their logistics are just expanding, every single year. They're able to do more and more and more. And, you don't talk about the logistic problems that you used to talk about 10 years ago, say. I mean, you still do talk about some of them, but not in the same way. I mean, there's not as much backup at the ports anymore. You don't have these long waiting times usually. So things are moving a little bit more smoothly, but there's so much more to do.
So what used to be maybe a talking point or impacting our prices here is gone away. Is being reduced.
So it's shifted because you don't talk about really those huge delays at the ports anymore. Now it's more about, okay, how can the middle of the country, Mato Grosso, be accessed? And so, when I was there, we were told basically, in 4 to 5 years, they're expecting the railroad to reach central Mato Grosso. Now it's only in the southeast, but their rail network is not like it is in the U.S. And the road network isn't either. So those things, though, could be only a few years away from being sorted out or at least brought to the next level. So that if they do that, that's gonna only help them continue to supply the world.
Well, let's look at what their current supply is. With Ryan in Iowa, a lot of great questions. We're not going to get them all because I'm talking, sorry. Ryan's question first. I hear rumors Brazil's having some quality issues like mold with soybeans coming out of Mato Grosso. Is this a big enough issue to convince other countries to pay for more expensive U.S. beans?
I don't really know that it is yet. And northern Mato Grosso, where beans are planted first and then harvested first. I mean, it's a rainy spot. So this is a common problem with these areas. But I have seen more reports. It's definitely a thing in the short term. But right now, I do think it looks like a short-term issue for right now. But it is something to watch. I mean, I think, February soybean exports for Brazil are supposed to be a massive record. So, we'll find out here in a couple weeks how those went and, did they meet expectations? Maybe were there a little bit of delays?
Is the big destination for their export still China, or has India come in and shoehorned a little bit into that discussion?
75% of Brazil's soybean exports go to China.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
That hasn't changed. That actually hasn't changed in a really long time. It's just that both demand, like Chinese demand and Brazilian exports have expanded together, but the share has actually been kind of constant, 70 to 75%. I think that's really interesting, just because, you kind of wonder, what is Brazil's production capacity? What is China's demand capacity? I mean, those are the biggest questions in my mind.
But you could argue that the two have grown in the same stride for stride, partially because they've been working together a little more, and the one country's getting bigger. I mean, all these different things. Correct. So if you do, as Bradley in Nebraska wants to know, if you do have these bad beans and you have to blend them off, are the U.S. beans worth the premium China's paying? So I guess really what a lot of people want to know is, Can this rally keep going?
Yeah.
And is it because of any of these reasons?
Right. Well, I still don't really think it's enough right now to have China come, back to the U.S. Unless there is this trade deal, which takes fundamentals off the table. I mean, when you're buying more expensive beans for political reasons, fundamentals don't work. That's not a quality issue. That's not a delayed shipment issue. That's just a completely political thing. So you can't. It's really hard when that enters the mix to really kind of sort things out. But yeah, no, I think right now it is still a very short-term issue, but it's still early. It's still early. We're just getting started with the export season, and a lot can happen in Brazil.
Okay, one more Brazilian question. It kind of ties in just a tiny little bit, and we're going to skip Philip. But thank you, Philip, by the way, the guest on this week's MTOM podcast. Gary in Wisconsin. This is an infrastructure question. Brazil's always had this infrastructure thing. What are some things that are actually holding them back from being more acres, back from large acre growth?
Yeah, well, they actually have had large acreage growth. They have increased their soybean area for 19 consecutive seasons now. I mean, I don't know what crop or region you can find a stat like that. I mean, that is unheard of. So they are expanding their acres. But I think in terms of really, being able to take that next step up is really, like I said, the infrastructure. I mean, you don't have the railroads like you have in the U.S. You don't have the road networks like you have in the U.S. And it takes a long time. I mean, Mato Grosso is humongous. So building that road, they're actually expanding the road so it's now 2 separate roadways. And I had the pleasure of being stuck in truck traffic on BR 163 in Mato Grosso. I think it's a rite of passage for any visitor there. But but the bean trucks. It was filled with trucks. And so I think that is still a limiting factor. But if they ever sort that out, oh man, the potential is huge. But it'll take a while.
It'll take a while. All right,
yes.
let's go Northern Hemisphere for a moment. James in Minnesota. And this is a question that's coming, especially when you look to the west. Is it too early for a dry weather rally?
Yes. And the reason I say that is because we remember back to February of last year when all the meteorologists were saying, and no digging on meteorologists because I am a former meteorologist. Okay, like I understand my position. Okay, but we were told that there could be really a bad drought in 2025 potentially, and I know a lot of people didn't sell because of that potential, and so I think a lot of people will be jaded if to hear of any kind of drought concerns at this point in the season, just because You did not see that happen last year. You saw the exact opposite happen. So, yeah, I think it's too early just because of what we just experienced last year and how it did not pan out the way that, we were told.
And in certain areas, I'm thinking basically I-70 north, it has been to Minneapolis. There's kind of a donut there where there's not been a lot of moisture. However, the southeast to the east coast, different. Yeah. The west is pretty dry. We're going to hear stories very, very soon about Colorado's snowpack and what that means for everybody who takes water allotments. I guess if you put it through that scope, with stuff that's already dry, not what could be dry, what's the impact?
I think you can definitely go into a season kind of dry and then recover. I don't think that that's fatal, but I do think, we're sitting here in February in Iowa, it's 60 degrees, and it's been really, really mild up in the northern plains as well, and dry. And I think a lot of times when you see a warmer February, especially in the north, sometimes that is a precursor to some of our drier seasons. Maybe not, at a 2012 scale, but I do think that is maybe a warning flag. I'm not completely sure, but to see this weather in February just so mild and just lack of snow and precipitation, it's something that I think we should be a little bit concerned about, but not terribly concerned.
Yeah, just Iowa in general. We had a lot of snow in December and in January, and it's gone. But shorts, the shorts weather, be careful when you have those white legs showing up. Let's could we go down? Oh, let's go Ken in Michigan. Ken had a question about sorghum, and this is something. Glenn, thank you for your question. We did kind of cover that in the analysis section. What do you make of the increase in Chinese imports of U.S. grain sorghum? I know there's a corn quality problem there. Will it develop into corn imports? Again, something we covered, but let's look at it from the sorghum standpoint, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it just speaks to China's need for grain imports. I mean, they have to cover their needs. U.S. sorghum is priced right. Also, it checks the box of just kind of goodwill and showing that China is purchasing U.S. goods. So I think there's a few uses there. But yeah, I think that is that a precursor to the Chinese corn imports potentially? Maybe. But for me, like I said, I think that it's going to be really watching that corn price in China and kind of looking at how trade unfolds here in the next, coming weeks. And, we're kind of listening for maybe some more confirmation as to, what does China plan to do, especially on the soybean side. But then, are we going to further roll back tariffs, have another trade truce for a year? What does that look like? That's really where I would see a lot of optimism potentially for all U.S. products, not just soybeans or sorghum or even corn.
And how long can your optimism last? Can it last to when we start turning the planters?
Sure, but you're only ever one tweet away from everything just turning overnight. So, and that is the reality that we're living in, and we know that, we've lived it. So we're kind of used to it, but you never fully get used to it. So, but as long as everything kind of keeps going, as is, I don't really see a whole lot of, super heavy news because, we did get a giant crop in January from the USDA corn crop. And so, was all of our bearish news out of the way at that point? Maybe. So, and I think a lot of people thought that, back in January. So, how much worse can these numbers get? Now we're increasing corn exports. So, even further. So, I'm cautiously optimistic now in planting.
That'll be the headline. 2026, Karen Braun, cautiously optimistic. Good. Do I have it right?
Sure.
All right.
Print it.
Karen, thank you. Appreciate it. Great insight.
Yes, thank you.
Karen Braun, everybody. And next week, we are going to have a story about turning waste into investment in your operation. And Sean Hackett's going to sit there and have a conversation. Thank you so very much for joining us. Have a great week.